All right. Welcome to the Gimel webinar entitled How to Work with IG Vendors, Top 10 Secrets Revealed. We will reveal, in fact, at least top 10 of these secrets if we can get to it. It actually is a nice topic. We have done this before with this exact same audience. It was so well received that we're reprising it again. And I would say the information doesn't just apply to strictly to IG. It's really kind of software procurement in general, but we're all in the IG camp. So those are our areas of specialty. And we'll do intros here in just a second. But before we do, let's get to some housekeeping items. Feel free to submit your questions throughout. We will try to get to them if we can, and we'll sprinkle them in where possible. The recording will be sent around within 24 to 48 hours right after the session. And we've got Austin on to help out if you have any technical difficulties. So please let us know if you're having any challenges. So without further ado, this is Gimel. Gimel's an information governance software provider. So I won't go through all this, but these are all the wonderful things that we do for our customers. Probably we've been in business about 20 years. And so records management, information governance, data discovery, data migration are all things that we do and happy to help you with. If you have any needs, feel free to reach out. And on to today's speakers. So I'll go first. I'm the guy already talking, Dean Gonzowski. We've got everyone broken out on to another side. So let's go to the next one and then we'll go into elaborate detail about each of our speaker bios. I'm the CRO at Gimel. I was previously at ActiveNav. I've been in the information governance and e-discovery space for a long time at places like Relativity and Clearwell and Recommind and a few others. Licensed attorney by trade, but no longer practice. And I'm happy to be joined by our wonderful panelists here today. And I think, Anne, you're up next. Want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
You bet. Hi, I run a company called Abundiant. You may have known me in a previous role with another company in the information governance space. Before that, I was with a little shop called Accenture. What I founded Abundiant to do was to help our clients find and use the information that they need, both structured data and unstructured content, and in particular, mash that together into insights that allow them to make better business decisions. Delighted to be here, longtime colleague and partner of Gimel, and appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this.
Awesome. Thanks, Anne. And let's see if I can keep scrolling. Here we go. Kurt, why don't you go next?
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm Kurt Teese, Vice President and Product Evangelist at Access. So my career has focused on, what I'd say, solving customer problems in records management, information governance, with a focus on physical records, which then leads to digital transformation and management of the information lifecycle. So very excited to participate.
All right. We're going to be doing more than participating. Dropping some knowledge on revealing secrets and all. Mark, how about yourself?
Sure. My name's Mark Van Eman. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Radix Data. We are a technology company that try to solve a lot of the legacy record challenges as part of the digital conversion processes. And we try to do it with some good old-fashioned technology, not so much AI and that kind of fun terminology, and very excited to be part of this.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Let's jump into it. When we did this before, we could spend almost the whole time on each of these sort of secrets, but we'll try to keep moving quickly and get to all of them. So let's hit number 10 in descending order. Sort of RFPs behind the scenes, who's gaming the systems, and RFPs worth the time and effort. And I think we spent a good chunk talking about this one before. I think there's a love-hate relationship with RFPs. There's no other way around it. Maybe I'll go to the panel. Are RFPs worth the time and effort? And if the answer is yes, is it a qualified yes?
Yes, it's qualified, yes.
Okay. How would you qualify it, Ann?
Well, I think, we've got to respond when clients are trying to find vendors to solve their issues. If we don't respond, we're not even in the conversation. At the same time, RFPs can be crafted in such a way that as a provider, you're kind of longing for live dialogue to try to understand what it is that they really are trying to solve for. Because perhaps they've been prescriptive in the RFP and they are very certain they know exactly what they need. But if you could just have a conversation with them, you might be able to uncover some layers that might direct them a different way, or perhaps confirm that, yep, they know exactly what they need. But it's sort of like having a relationship by email. It's not nearly as rich and collaborative and partner oriented as a relationship with live dialogue.
And you have to have all your answers in little tiny boxes with a certain amount of characters.
160 characters or less.
Well, from being a technology provider, the challenge is the customer doesn't know what they don't know. So, when you try to respond to an RFP, as Ann was talking about being able to communicate, you so badly want to jump in and go, hey, but it also does this, that it's not part of your RFP. It does that and a lot more. But since you're not able to typically communicate in that fashion, you're sort of just having to, ask and answered, and it misses a lot of the strike zone.
I think that's right. And the analogy with email is really appropriate, because it is, I think what we've all experienced is how RFPs can be limiting, and there is sort of a dark side to them. They're a bit of a necessary evil in the worst cases. I've also been in organizations where we've just wholesale decided we're not going to respond to RFPs because it doesn't create the right sort of relationship and dynamic relative to the effort involved. So they are a challenge, more and more with procurement involved. It is a necessary process. They are hard to do well. There's a way to do them well where there's good documentation and requirements, and it keeps everyone on the same page. But there is a lot of burden on both sides to make them function in that way.
Yeah, and the saying goes like it's a very expensive process to come in second, right? You spend a lot of time and energy, and you go like, oh, we were right there. We were in the 2 finalists, and we still lost. And you're like, goodness, 6, 9, 12 months later. It is hard. There's one we're responding to right now, and I was talking to David Quackenbush, a guy that you guys all know, and we're literally trying to figure out what to do, because there's pricing and there's 3 rounds. So they tell you after the round, you're 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5, and how do you want to adjust your pricing? And it's like, where do we start? Where do we end? It's we're in good shape now, but then everyone else is going to adjust their pricing, and so it's this kind of musical chairs game of how do you and I say game the system, but there's an element of you're kind of playing a game because the other people are playing a game, right? And that's a tough one. Kurt, you talked about sort of not doing them wholesale. Are the other panelists have experience with sort of just some that they'll say like this is a bad fit? It's just not. We could play, but it doesn't seem suited for us, and we're going to waste a bunch of time, and so we're just going to no bid it. What are your guys' thoughts on that? Do you do that somewhat as well?
We do that a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you still have to take the time to go through the RFP. There's a lot of them especially dealing with the government, whether it's the state or the federal, to look at them, because that is the only way they typically procure. But it's doing a cursory look over to say, no, this is going to take a lot more time and effort to try to get further down the path. And like you said, it's an expensive proposition to come in second. So if it's doesn't look like a good fit, as much as you would hate to turn away a possibility of a customer, it just doesn't make sense.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to actually use an example of this very week. There is one due with a fairly large organization, and we're very clear we could do this part of it really well, and we could go find a partner to do this other part of it that we could do, but you really want somebody who does that part for a living to do it. But the way the RFP is crafted, it did not really invite that kind of a structured response. So we just decided we're going to let it, we think it will play out where they're going to break it up into different pieces anyway. So, because I can't really imagine the requests for skills were so broad that even the largest consulting firm that I'm aware of wouldn't be able to do all of that comprehensively. So I think it'll probably break down into a few things, and we'll just pick it up second round.
And I think it was you on the last session that talked about how with RFPs in that case is you have someone that's looking for something. You do, as you just mentioned, a piece really well. Well, they're really not doing themselves any favors, because they're really not ultimately getting the best solution for what they really want by trying to do the RFP. It's just,
Mark, I think that's right. And this always sort of triggers lessons learned, painful ones especially. But often you look at an RFP and you can kind of tell whether they're looking at the right players, who's going to be the best fit. But I'm always intrigued at the people who are missing. When you look at the RFP and they have to send it to a certain amount of people, and you can look and you go, these aren't, they're going to respond, but Dean, as you're saying, it's not really fair to them. They're going to put in the time and effort. And often there's a feeling if they did more due diligence up front, either they're missing people that would be good to consider, but often there are people responding that aren't a great fit. They're not getting the best options, or they're looking, the RFP doesn't have one person who can do it all. And so everyone's wondering, should I respond, because we won't be a perfect fit?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's this, we talked about this last time. It's just this blunt instrument that kind of forces you to say yes, no. Well,
Yeah.
The short answer is yes, we kind of do that, but we're not great at it. But we don't want to say no, because there's other parts we're really good at, but you can't say like put an asterisk in bold, you can't say we're amazing at that one. And it's a challenge, and hopefully some of this can come out in the wash and through demonstrations and the rest. But that's probably the hardest part of this. Well, let's keep moving, because like I said, we could spend the whole time on this one. Let's get to number 9, if we can scroll properly. Oh, there we go. What about, because RFPs, necessary evil, we kind of talked about. What about POCs, proofs of concept, for folks who are not familiar? Would you rather do a POC? If somebody said, like, put a gun to your head and said you could do a POC or an RFP, which one do you jump on and why?
That's easy. POC.
Okay. And why?
No, again, we're a technology company, but I think the POC, it's allowing us, back to the relationship. It's starting the communication, the relationship building. It's allowing you to, let your product speak for itself, and it allows you to highlight the things that are, really going to be valuable versus a RFP, which is, again, the yet more yes, no, do we or do we not?
And I would say, Mark, knowing your solution, that a POC would be a really good tool, because having that success criteria, seeing it is believing it, and that's very effective, particularly if you have success criteria that that if you go through the POC, you're confident in what the product can deliver, you're going to meet the success criteria and go on to the next level.
Exactly.
And what you wouldn't want to do is a POC like an RFP, where you have multiple participants, you have a fuzzy success, and it's really used just for information gathering.
A great point. And the success criteria and laying that out from the beginning is as important as anything else you're going to do. So, because if you go into it, like you said, and it's fuzzy, we go, oh, that was successful. And they're like, well, it didn't do this, or, so that collaboration in the front end is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
But I would just reinforce that POCs are really great when there is a solution involved, whether that's existing software or something that you're going to craft out of a toolbox of accepted apps. But it's a little tough. For example, can you imagine, what does a POC look like for a broad scale change management experience?
Yeah, good point.
Right.
Yeah.
And what does a POC look like? Kurt, in your business, you might be able to do POCs for, a very small I would call it a pilot, though, not a POC, because you would be doing real storage and classification and movement of information, as opposed to a POC, which is kind of pretend, right? We're going to dummy up some data, and at the end, if we throw it away, at least that's my definition, is the POC is sort of a practice round that can be trashed if it doesn't go well, whereas a pilot is, legitimate live production information getting.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful that we in fact do a lot of pilots trying to encourage customer collaboration and joint development. But yeah, the POC in my mind is sort of, it either works or it doesn't, and we're going to prove it out to meet that success criteria. But yeah, a very more kind of a sharp instrument in this case.
And I like with pilots, and certainly from a technology side. And by the way, there was a question about IG versus knowledge management and cybersecurity. And I think for what we're saying, they're all kind of similar in that there's tools and use cases and problems. And where I was going to go with my comment about pilots is that a lot of times you'll have environmental issues. So yes, the piece of software works generally this way. And then as applied to your bizarro implementation of a knowledge management system or whatever the thing is we're trying to connect to, that's a $64,000 question. And so, speeds and connectivity and throughput and all these other things, play out, I think, sometimes in POCs, but definitely in pilots, because you are, and I think to your point, you use production. I like that language, which is, it's a production instance. We're trying to accomplish a thing, even if it's a small slice. We want to get some actual value out of the exercise versus a kind of theoretical, like turn it on over there and watch it in the corner and see if it works. And so I would argue pilots are probably even more valuable. And I also like, for me, people having to pay a little bit of money for a pilot, could be 5, 10, 20 grand, something sort of nominal. But it shows that they're serious and that they can write a check and that you've made your way through procurement and those sorts of things. So that to me is kind of nice as well. It's less about the exact, it could be a $1 kind of pilot, but it's more that there's been a way to track money flowing through this whole sort of grand exercise.
That's as much about skin in the game as it is anything else. Emotional and mental skin in the game. That's sort of personified through the exchange of currency, right?
Yes, and I think you'll see sometimes sort of the people looking theoretically at a solution, and it's like, well, and the solution may even solve the success criteria. But then the question is, well, what happens if you don't purchase the solution? And if the answer is nothing, then a lot of times you have people kind of testing, tire kickers just to kick tires because it's fun to kick tires and test software, which I'm sure none of us here in the room are big fans of, because that's a lot of time and energy for people who aren't really serious. All right, well, let's jump on to number 8. What is the true value of vendor references and how many should you request? Thoughts on this one? Because where I was going to go with it was, if you can avoid the RFP, the pilot, the POC, and just say, hey, this works, and you're a big pharmaceutical company and we work with other big pharmaceutical companies, and go talk to them and they'll just tell you it works. That to me is my favorite solution. I mean, aside from just buying it, and, you know,
I-
not asking any questions, but that one feels to me is like one of the better ways to go. What are your guys' thoughts?
I think that's right. And again, all of these, you know, when we're talking about sort of the secrets or dark side of this can be abused. I think as a customer, doing your due diligence and seeking out your own references, people have used it so you can find the good and the bad. When it's part of an RFP, especially, the references are going to be hand selected. So they're not really a cross section. Everyone's going to put their best references. And it also does create a burden that those same people tend to be references over and over again, because many organizations are not allowed to act as references. So that also is limiting. I think it's a great way. There's no better proof than talking to other people with that experience, but it also is kind of difficult in a structured process to get those valid references.
How do you know that you're not getting bamboozled by a reference? That's a
Well,
technical term.
I think that's
bamboozling.
important to understand the motivations of the referring source, right? I don't know of any situations where there are kickbacks to any of those people, but I think that's probably worth looking into just to make sure that there's nothing like that. But I think if you set aside, I mean, yeah, with RFPs, Kurt, you're right on. You've got to be very precise and selective. And you might have 25 companies that you helped in the last 2 years doing this thing, but only 4 of them might be available to be references because of their policies. And so for every RFP that you're responding to, you can't go back and ask the same 4. So there's lots of challenges with that. I mean, you could, but that would get old. But I think the essence that clients are seeking is, can I trust this provider to understand us and care enough about our unique needs to meet those needs? I mean, at the end of the day, isn't it really, they just want to know that they can trust what you do and your integrity and your commitment to success. So in my mind, some of that can be achieved just by chatting with people in the industry, right?
Yeah.
But it is a unique conversation. RFP references are one thing, and just getting references in general is, I think, another.
I feel like
Yeah.
we could do a coffee table book on this, and maybe that's our next step, because there's so many war stories. And Ann, as you're mentioning that, there was a period a while back during the software selection where I was involved, where you had sort of a cottage industry of people doing a selection process, and they had a series of vendors. They were staying in, they had to fly first class, stay in the top, 5-star hotel. And the outcome was similar each time, but they ran a process, and the buyer thought they were getting a very unbiased, impartial process, but it was very performative. So each of these have, I think, the opportunity for abuse.
There's still value to this though, because even when it's, through an RFP process, you at least, as Ann talks about the credibility and the comfort part of, even you sure better have at least one customer that's happy, but especially if it's a known customer, somebody that anybody would say, okay, I know who they are, and it's a, high enough level person and they're singing your praises, there's still value to that.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, on that one, we talked about this, I think, when we did the first version, is there are sort of, and a little bit to your point, Ann, there are some notorious companies that will have 1 or 2 or 3 references, and then everyone knows who those references are and knows that it's no deeper than that. And so that's where kind of talking to the community and looking on, some of the reference sites, sort of G2 Crowd or Gartner, Capterra, places like that allow you to do kind of broader, user community kind of stuff, I think is really valuable, because it's, if they trot out that same reference all the time, and they've got one happy customer, may not get you a lot talking to just that one. But let's jump into number 7 here. Pricing 101. We talked about a little pricing example before, but this is a tough one, right? For all of us on the vendor side, playing the game with what is this going to cost. It's relatively easy to, not that any of us do this, but for other people to play the game between software versus services and first year versus out years. And, it's like a little bit like that, the new car shopping, right? They get you, MSRP is one thing, but add-ons and taxes and things and options, that purchase price looks very different than what the price was on the sticker. What would you guys say is sort of the best way to kind of navigate through this from either side of the equation?
I'll go first and edit away if you guys disagree, but as a buyer, and I've been a buyer, I've been on that side of the table. A thing to think about, especially if you're negotiating something that's a fairly long-term contract, is that, just ask yourself the question, do you really want the lowest paid resources in the industry to be working for you? And what I mean by that is, do you want the people who can't get another job and so they keep the low paying job? Do you want the people who are part of a company that can't make the kind of profit that they should be making to grow and invest and hire better people and improve their skills and stay on top of everything? I mean, maybe you do, but as a buyer myself, that was not something that I wanted to do, because it puts your provider in a fairly difficult position, right? Especially these longer term service contracts or ongoing support contracts for technology, et cetera. You want people to be rewarded well for what they do. And as far as I'm concerned, if my business partners are doing well, then I'm doing well too. I don't see it as if they're doing badly, I'm getting cheated, or if they're doing well, I'm getting cheated. I feel like, I'd like to see all boats rise, kind of.
And that's been my experience as well. And I think maybe some of our negative experience with RFPs is that they do kind of promote the lowest bidder and this type of thing, and they're not collaborative as you described. And I think we all feel like in the solution space, that's one of the best processes, when you have a trusted relationship. Some of my best experiences have been speaking with the customer, understanding their needs, and then saying, what you're looking for is going to be expensive, and having them say, thank you. Now we know that you understand our problem, because this isn't going to be easy. And when you can sort of look at, you want your problem to be solved, and solved in the right way. And then when you can explain, well, these are the costs and where that money should go to. I think, not that you're trying to overprice the deal, but you want to appropriately price it so you're able to deliver on what they're looking for.
Absolutely. Well, I had an experience in my past life where we had to outsource a large scanning project, and we went, kept hammering and hammering, trying to get the lowest price we could. Not the way to go. As you guys are talking, I mean, what ended up happening is you're not getting the support from the top level, because it's not a high margin deal, or even probably a profitable deal. And now when you really need the service and there's problems, they disappear. And, I look back on it as that was our fault. Had we not tried to play it that way, we would have, and gone more looking for the service and what would that actually cost, instead of trying to dictate the price. then it would have played out differently. There's no question.
And I liked your point you're kind of making, which is you can strike too good a deal. And then you in essence put your provider out of business, and then you've bought a solution that just kind of gets end of life because your provider's been forced to make too many bad deals. So that's not good for anybody either. So, that level of, fast, cheap, and good. How do you, you can get 2 out of 3 cheaps, enterprise software and enterprise solutions where, legal regulatory compliance probably not where you want to like penny pinch. You don't overpay, but I would certainly aim for more of the middle than at the low end. Let's jump to number 6. All right. So what about buying futures? So this is, I think, my phraseology, but you're as part of a RFP or the RFP, the vendor says yes to everything. And some of that exists today and some of it's on the roadmap, quote unquote. How much stock should you put into that kind of we'll build it in the future if we win kind of thing?
So
Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, I was just going to give a quick response. I think if you can be very specific, this is a mission critical item, and maybe that leads to a POC or a pilot if it's that critical. But I think just adding things to the roadmap that are nice to haves, I don't know that it does a lot.
I totally agree with what Kurt's saying there. And I was sort of going to say similar thing. And from the standpoint of being if you're the vendor side, you don't want to over, promise and under deliver. So the last thing you want to do is put all these future nice to have things on there that look cool, but you really don't at this point even know how long it's going to take, what it's going to cost, or if it's going to work. The real thing is collaborating with the customer to find out what are the have to haves that need to be added. And then it's not an immediate answer. It's going back to the team and coming back and saying, yes, we can do that. This is what it's going to take. And, but other than that, you're just setting yourself up for future failure.
And I've seen this one, which is the customer comes through the laundry list of like, I want 50 things and can I get them? And the answer is like, I mean, yes, you can, but to your point, I think, Mark, it's like, what are the 5 that you need now versus the 10 you need in 3 years versus the ones that you're never actually going to deploy, but somebody just said to put on the list. And so it's a little bit of that meshing kind of like, all right, tomorrow, what are you going to do? Like when you implement this, a lot of this stuff is 18 months out. So we got 18 months to go figure it out. If you still want it, we can go build it and have you talk with our developer. So I think that's some interesting dialogue always. And that's kind of how software gets made and companies get built, right? Is that you can influence roadmap by being a good active customer versus sitting on the sidelines. Number 5, so we're halfway through our security assessments of waste of time in practice, not in principle. And what's the better way? I think we had some strong feelings about this last time because security assessments are, we talked about RFPs and other things being time consuming. I think Mark and Kurt, you guys had some strong opinions on this.
Y'all had some passion around this.
We just, it's been a little while now, but just finished a SOC audit and at the same time doing a SIG for a large customer. So in concert, the problem you run into it is that it's a lot of effort. And so you get a SOC audit for the purpose or an ISO, whatever it is you get. But that's usually by itself not enough. That's like, okay, great. You got that certification. Well, now do hours. Well, the problem is the hours contain 70, 80, 90% of what was in the SOC audit, but asked in different ways. And probably a quarter of it is in something that is irrelevant. In other words, maybe we're all, SaaS based and it's asking about Colo or vice versa. So is there a better way? I'm sure there is. I don't know the answer to what that is, but there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, this has become, I think, another blunt instrument where the InfoSec questionnaires, third-party assessments have just exploded. They're longer and longer, and you get 600 questions, and they just use it for everything. And the cost of doing this isn't factored in to the product, but it's becoming more and more of a resource requirement. The assessments are real, you know, the standards and compliance requirements, security, the threats driving this need are legitimate. But Mark, as you say, somehow there needs to be a better way, it seems, because this is a resource drain.
Yeah, I think Mark, go ahead, sorry, Ann.
I would focus the effort, right? If you're procuring services and not software, then it's interesting, but not all that relevant about the security audit, as long as you're providing technology and firewalls that are compliant with your organization's security, right? And often in services deals, clients will want the providers to use their technology. They don't really want, to use somebody else's company's laptop to log into their network. So with services, I'm not sure that it's as big of a need as perhaps it's made out to be right now. In the software world, obviously, you need to know that whatever you're using to process your information meets those standards. But to Mark's point, before you ask all of those questions, perhaps make sure that whoever's writing that part of the RFP is familiar with the different certifications and make that part of the RFP an if then, right? Do you have this certification? Great, answer these 5 more questions. Do you have that certification? Okay, we need these 10 more questions. So that you don't, but that I understand internally within organizations. That's a long conversation with IT and procurement together to get them all familiar with and understanding the different security certifications that are acceptable to their organization, and coming up with that before just doing a ground up. Here's our 100 questions of what you do for info security.
Yeah, and try not to be bespoke here, right? If they're, whether it's SOC or ISO or what, pick your standard.
Right.
Try to leverage that, right? It's there's no point to create your own adventure here if you don't need to. It's just extra painful on the vendor, and it's hopefully you're not enjoying causing vendors pain. But try to pick a standard, I think is probably the best way to go about it. All right, up to number 4. So how do you avoid the professional services black hole? How much scoping is enough scoping? Because you fundamentally, and this is probably you live this, right? You don't know what you don't know, and then you'll know a little more, but you still won't really know, and then you do it's just inherent layers of the onion till you're halfway in it, 3/4 of the way in it, and it just keeps evolving. Like everyone wants to have a scope of work that's like ironclad, but how practical is that?
Yeah, I mean, one of my mentors taught me this when I left Accenture. When I was in the Big Four, it was, we can do anything and everything. There's nothing too big for us. And we dove into RFPs that were gargantuan often, without any doubt that we could do it all. But when you're in a mid-size firm, which is more common in the IG space that we occupy, you need to be thinking a little more closely about it. And this mentor guided me to a really good work habit, and that is to engage with a client in a scoping study. I mean, even if only for a few $1,000s in a week, right? Just spend the time. And back to some of our earlier conversation, have the client have skin in the game about that scoping study. Don't just do it for free so that they can ask, 5 or 6 vendors to do that. But that gives you practice with the client and conversation. How do you collaborate? What kind of information Are they happy to share? When do they get nervous about sharing? What's making them nervous? Is it an insecurity about their reporting levels and their spending limits? What is it, right? There's just all sorts of dynamics that have nothing to do with the work itself that you can uncover in the middle of that kind of scoping study. So I guess that's one thing that I would suggest for professional services in particular. And another is if you're not able to do that, then just keep your initial scope fairly small, right? 1 to 3 months, a few big goals that are very specific to a certain area, keep a fence around the audience that you're aiming for, and then use that as the opportunity with the client to figure out what to do next. Maybe that the client could do some of the work themselves. Maybe they don't need to hire you for all of that. They thought they did, but maybe you've been able to teach them how to do some of that. And I think that can help, where otherwise it's a guessing game too many months out, right? About what's happening. And if you're a service provider being forced to guess, what are you going to do? Bake in a bunch of contingency, right? So,
and Anna, I agree. And I think of the topics, if we could design, a procurement process, certainly scoping is one that is worthy of more attention in most cases. And also, as you said, investment. And it's, often very difficult for people to spend the money because they consider it as part of the sales cycle. But good scoping will avoid a lot of the pain further down, but it's often overlooked.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Mark. I don't want to cut you off, but it's trying to get to
No,
number
keep
3.
going. They answered that one beautifully. We'll go to the next one.
All right, cool. All right, number 3. So how do you ensure you work with the team from the pitch versus other resources, right? This is kind of the classic. The people who are telling you they're going to do the work aren't the ones who actually get it. And what do you guys do around that to make sure that, it could be in whether certainly professional services, but even on kind of the software side and sales engineers or consultants or whoever it might be, like how do you make sure that the presentation people are the people who are at the coalface with you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, in our case, it's relatively easy because we spell it out. We're typically the person that is, doing the pilot and running the show there is going to be the same person that's going to follow them all the way through. But part of that spelling that out from the beginning, who is the team that's going to perform the work? Who is how's support handled? It's all laid out. It's got to all be laid out, because you don't want to have all of a sudden this, surprise where it's like, oh, well, who are these people? We don't know them. It's like, well, you had the A team to start. Now you got the B team.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just really and from another point of view, you also want to make sure from the vendor side that you do that, because that is the relationship. Same thing goes though, where you're working with, the resource at the customer, and all of a sudden you're not working with them anymore because now the deal's done and you're down at a different level. So it sort of goes both ways. You just got to keep that open, collaboration, communication, and relationship going.
Yeah, I think you see this sometimes with even subcontractors to third parties. So some of it's contractual, and so even if it's not kind of bait and switch, they might just get busy and roll a bunch of other people onto the project. Well, in the interest of time, let's make sure we get to the last 2, and then we'll see if we have some time for questions. And I think you're the change management lady. What role does change management play in kind of this whole process?
Just for context, a million years ago, before change management was even the name, what the industry was called, I was recruited into a practice that pretty much the same season that I arrived, finally landed on the name Change Management Services. So this is sort of part of my professional DNA, and I think that there's very few things that change management does not have a role in. I think that it permeates whatever is happening. If it involves, we did something this way and now we're going to do it that way. There's context, there's training, there's understanding why. There's obviously executive support that needs to be garnered and mobilized and used to get the budget and the enthusiasm and the messaging around the why and the fact that there will be a change. In my experience, when we have skipped or chenched on the change management work, the outcome has suffered for the client.
Yeah, understood. And I think you've you teed up nicely our final question, which is around executive, sponsorship and support. And it's easy to say, yes, you should have it for whatever project you're doing, but is that practical, and how high does that go? And is it a sort of generalized blessing from the quote unquote executives versus they actually know what you're doing? And so what are your guys' thoughts on some best practices around this?
I'll say that, we mentioned earlier that the resources, and you don't want people that are just going around kicking tires for the sake of kicking tires. I'm always shocked at how many projects require engagement, looking at vendors, selection process, and then they're going to take it to management to see if they can get approval. That is part of the procurement process or the decision making. But if you don't have executive support, and this is not a project, it's a very difficult relationship to sort of be doing all this work on spec and then be seeing if it will be approved, if it will hit the budget. It happens a lot, but it's definitely a difficult way to engage.
I think that's a great point. It's not so much just should you get it, but when should you get it? Because it's almost got to start from the beginning, especially, and obviously there's some small projects that, everyday type projects that maybe not, but anything that's going to be anything significant or where it requires true change management, then it's really more the question of when do you engage with, to get executive support. And I think Kurt's right. I think that's got to be right up front.
I think at the end of the day, they each have a language and they have levers that matter to them. So, if their lever is cost control, if their lever is customer experience, et cetera, then you shape your messages to the executives about that engagement way ahead of the time, Kurt, to your point. And Mark, to your point, in language that matters to them. No, does a senior VP of a Fortune 100 company need to care about a $50,000 project? Probably not, but not financially necessarily, but they probably do need to care if there's a strategic impact, if it is the beginning of something, that a journey that their subordinates want to take the company on. They need to be part of that, and the messaging around it. And I will say, and this is some old school change management coming out here, but a long time ago, a guy named Daryl, I think O'Connor was his name, wrote about management black holes in organizations. I'm making a hole. And so you can get all the executive support you want, you can get on the ground enthusiasts, but if you miss middle management and they don't understand why or comprehend how it impacts work, then you've got a breakdown. So sure, you need to go as high as you need to go to get the decision-making and the messaging and the support, but you also have to really invest in middle management regardless of the project.
Yeah.
And maybe you're kind of related slightly, which is maybe it's less about executive, but more sort of cross-departmental support, which is, I'm sure you guys have seen this, which is you get your unit, legal, records, risk, compliance, etc., wants to do a thing, and then they clash very quickly with InfoSec or IT or somebody else who's like, either no, we're not doing that, we have other priorities, or we already have a tool to do the thing that you guys want to do, use this one. And so there's that level of kind of collaboration, even at the non-executive level, because you can run into that brick wall.
So it's really organizational support is what you're looking for.
I think so. Yeah. Up and down kind of the chain, because you can get blocked at a bunch of different areas, not necessarily just the executive one. Well, that got us to just a few minutes left. We have a couple questions, and if you're in the audience there and want to chime in with some questions, feel free to shoot those over. Let's see. What are some things I can do to avoid vendor team shifting and are having to re-explain to new vendor team members who you are and what you need, etc.? Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to one of our numbers, right? And there, in today's market, the reality is everybody's got turnover, and so it might happen that somebody goes and takes a job and they've got a backfill, but that is totally on the provider to orient that person to your situation, to debrief. I mean, my goodness, we're in information governance and knowledge management. If we can't capture the knowledge and pass it on to people who are picking up a baton along the way, then we're in some deep stuff, right? Because this is our world. We should be able to do that. But yeah, I hear the frustration if you end up with turnover or just a new team for whatever. Maybe it's a logical change in phase of the project. It's tiring to have to re-explain yourself, right, as the client.
And I think related to the emphasis on good scope of work. So whether it's a business requirement documents, functional specs, the good practices here where everything isn't just oral and you have a meeting and it's explained, but is it documented? Is it well understood? I think it's a good practice on both sides.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, we've got time maybe for one or two more. This is a tough one. What are the absolute must-have questions to ask in an RFP?
Ooh.
The attorney in me wants to say it depends.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer.
Always depends.
Are there any questions that just are like absolutes, or is it?
So I'll just kind of spin my last answer that where I in my experience they're deficient is by not properly defining the scope and the requirements. And I think that the more effort that's put into that, the more accurate the vendor can be in responding, and the higher quality, and that should then roll into the scoping. So I don't know if there are particular questions. I mean, you could say price, but we've all talked about how that's one of the elements that can be gamed within the process. But I think good requirements, and that will depend upon what you're looking for.
I think what I would wish to include as a buyer is a question, and maybe it's a two-pronged question. What should we have asked you as a provider that we didn't think to ask you? And please tell us those questions and answer them. And then maybe another question of how else would you approach this problem? And give the vendor time and freedom to elaborate. I think that is as close to a collaborative RFP set of questions as we could get without it being live conversation.
Yeah, I like that question. And I think the question on, how do you, let them problem solve for you, just to show you how well they can do it.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I like that a lot. Well, let's try to grab one more here. What are some examples of future requests that can become costly additional charges? Thoughts on this one?
Again, I'd use that it depends, but from a software perspective, it would be things related to new solutions that don't exist that may require, significant, programming, significant technology, things like that. From a service or support standpoint, I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
I was going to say, Mark, sometimes we see this in geographies, right? It sounds sort of easy to say, well, what if we want a Greenland instance of whatever? And it's like, well, I mean, conceptually not a problem, practically logistics and data privacy and firewalls and data transport, like that, those are things that can get pretty
Or
hairy.
containerized instances.
Yeah.
Someone says, hey, you know what, you're cloud-based now. What if we wanted to have a containerized instance in our servers? What does that look like?
Yeah.
Those are much bigger conversations.
Yep. Well, let's do this. Let's wrap. And any final questions, comments for the audience? And let's go with you first. Ladies first.
Okay. I would just say thank you for allowing us to spend this time with you. And I would just encourage anyone who's in the process of considering finding new providers, whether it's software or services, be as collaborative as you wish them to be with you. As my mama used to say, treat people like you want to be treated. And so if you want a partnership, someone you can trust and turn to and kind of think out loud with safely, then be that way, right? And you'll attract the right provider that way.
Cool. Thanks, Kurt. How about you?
Yeah, I think this is a really great topic, and as you said, collaboration is really, I think, what we want on both sides. How do we find the mechanisms to achieve that? I think it's an important dialogue, and having the customer from their side is important. It's really a discussion that we probably need to have more of.
Absolutely. And I'll wrap this up by saying I think it's, sort of following up on what Ann said. I think it's key to, you really should be looking for a partner, not a provider. And the more time you can spend up front with scoping and, coming up with what it is the deliverables need to be, the rest of it should go smooth.
Yeah, and I'll just try to close this out. I'll say we've talked a little bit about this, sort of the blunt instruments. Blunt instruments are going to get you bad responses, right? And so whatever you can do to sharpen the instrument, and not try to get everyone to kind of fill out a 4,000 row sort of spreadsheet with limited characters, etc. Sounds great, but in practice, I think it's just too blunt, and you're going to get kind of garbage in, garbage out for that process. So thanks to the panelists. Thanks everybody for joining here today. And we'll make the recording available shortly. And
Thanks for having us.
It was fun. Yeah, thanks guys.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.